We're joined by Angus Robertson from the SNP, Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture in Scotland. Good morning, Mr Robertson.
Morning, Trevor.
Thank you for joining us. Now, Nicola Sturgeon's complained this week that Liz Truss hasn't been in touch. Is that still true?
I believe so, yeah.
And just as a matter of interest, why doesn't she just pick up the phone and call Liz Truss?
Well, I think the First Minister did speak in passing to Liz Truss at the funeral for Her Majesty the Queen, but it's common custom and practice when somebody takes up office. This is what happened with both Boris Johnson and his predecessor, that they got in touch with the First Ministers of both Scotland and Wales on assuming office within days of doing so. That's what happened then. That's not what's happening now, and it's disappointing and frankly a bit childish.
Well, yeah, but, you know, Nicola Sturgeon's been there a lot longer than Liz Truss. Wouldn't it be a bit grown up for her to... She knows Liz Truss. Just ring up and say, when are we going to have a chat?
I just told you that she did speak to her. What it is at issue is that the Prime Minister, who, if you remember, made great play of suggesting that she would ignore the First Minister of Scotland, is ignoring the First Minister of Scotland, is ignoring the First Minister of Wales, and that's not how it's supposed to work. In the devolved UK, a multinational state, we're supposed to have grown-up relations, which is exactly why the First Minister did speak to the new Prime Minister at the Queen's funeral. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister hasn't found time yet to speak to the First Ministers of Scotland or Wales since assuming office. Had time to speak to a lot of other people.
Oh, OK. This is, forgive me, this might be a little confusing for viewers. She has spoken to her or she has not spoken to her? Have they spoken or have they not?
Spoken to the First Minister of Scotland, spoke in passing to the Prime Minister at the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen. That's what I said a moment ago. What's normal when a Prime Minister takes office is that they call the leaders of governments and countries with whom they have a valued relationship. That's the normal custom and practice. And the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has not seen fit to speak to the First Ministers of Scotland or Wales at any great length since taking office, which is odd, given that a unionist politician who says that there's a respect agenda between the UK government and the different nations of the United Kingdom doesn't think that it's worth speaking to the leaders of Scotland or Wales. OK, I understand. The point is that Ms Sturgeon feels she hasn't been spoken to at the right time and with sufficient respect and at same length. Now, one of the things that they could have talked about then would have been the state of the economy and what you do about it together. Can you just make clear, what is the Scottish Government's point of view on the basic rate of income tax? Will it be agreeing with the UK Government that the basic rate should come down to 19p, which is in the Scottish Government's purview? It can decide whether it goes with it or doesn't. What are you going to do? So the first thing that the Scottish Government would do is tell the UK Government that it has made a huge mistake with its approach to the UK economy, crashing the currency, driving debt through the roof, leading to uncertainty in the markets that is driving mortgage rates up, which will make mortgage payments for far too many people the length and breadth of the UK unaffordable. So launching a kamikaze budget at the beginning of a term of office is certainly not something that the SNP would be supporting. And from the start, we have said that, especially in relation to the tax cuts to the rich, whether it's the 45p rate or whether it's the bankers' bonuses, that's exactly the wrong way to go. In terms of other tax changes, Deputy First Minister John Swinney has called together experts who will be advising him with a report before the end of this month when we have to make decisions about what we will be doing with tax rates in Scotland. You're absolutely right to highlight that we do have marginal controls over taxation in Scotland, and at that point the right decisions would be made. But we would certainly not have been emulating the very damaging approach that the UK Tory government has been making towards the economy in Scotland and the rest of the UK.
Oh, so if your view is that you do not want to copy what the Truss government is doing, it is quite possible that come April, Scots will be paying more in income tax than everybody else in the UK.
I'm sure you'd want to finish off that sentence by pointing out the fact to viewers in the rest of the UK that taxpayers in Scotland in general, the majority pay less tax across the piece than the rest of the United Kingdom. Those are the facts as they stand. We are trying to find the appropriate balance in government policy to make sure
Let's not confuse the total tax take.
Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, let me
sorry,
clarify my
Trevor.
question.
You didn't clarify. I'm sorry.
You've responded on the total tax take. The question I asked was that the individual taxpayer in Scotland would be paying a higher basic rate than others in the UK.
And as I said, and I'm not incorrect to point this out, the majority of taxpayers in Scotland pay less tax than the rest of the United Kingdom. That is the context at the present time. I also said just a moment ago that Deputy First Minister John Swinney, who's in charge of the public finances at this present time in Scotland, is reviewing the impact of the UK government's mini-budget to work out what the appropriate decisions should be in Scotland, and will be doing it on the basis of the facts, unlike the UK government that has been making very damaging decisions without the advice of the Office of Budget Responsibility. We are going to make decisions about Scotland's finances in a prudent way, but there's a wider point at issue with this, Trevor, which is Scotland doesn't need to be in this situation. We don't need to have our public finances decided upon by people that we have not elected since 1955. We, of course, have another option, and we voted in favour of that in last year's Scottish Parliament election, namely to have a referendum in this country so that we can become an independent state and rejoin the European Union. I would far rather not be at the mercy of Tory Chancellors of the Exchequer or Prime Ministers who we haven't voted for. It's not sustainable. And it's not sensible, given everything that we've learnt about their financial imprudence and their belief in a Thatcherite economic orthodoxy, which is going to cost us all dearly.
All right, let's move away from the things that for which, as you would put it, the Tories are responsible. And let's talk about the things which you do all by yourself. So, for example, there's supposed to be an inquiry into COVID in Scotland. Can you tell us when that's going to start? And by the way, can you tell us why the chair and I think four councils have resigned from that inquiry?
So in Scotland, we have a separation of powers. Government is separate from the legal system, so it's not for me to speak on behalf of Scottish judges or Scottish advocates about an inquiry that is separate from government. You'll have to arrange to speak to people in Scotland's legal system for those kind of questions. We value the separation of government and our judicial system, and it's going to remain that way.
Professor Peter Watson, who represents the families of those who lost loved ones, says this inquiry is going nowhere. It's commissioned by the Scottish Government. Surely you do have some responsibility for it.
Well, I would wish it could be underway, and I would wish that it would report as quickly as possible. The lessons need to be learned, and as you quite rightly say, families want answers. They deserve that. But I'm pointing out a basic fact about the way government and the way our judicial system works in this country. It's not for us to intervene in personnel decisions about independent legal inquiries. Of course, I hope that it is up and running as quickly as possible. I hope that it can conclude as quickly as possible. And it's a shame that things are not underway. Those questions, though, are rightly to be addressed at our legal authorities, who are very separate from government, and quite rightly so. And in the meantime, if there's any way that government can help, whilst protecting the independence of our legal system, to get on with the inquiry that we would all want to see conclude, we would be happy to do that.
All right, well, let's try and talk about something for which you and only you are responsible, which is what you say about IndyRef 2. The First Minister said this week that if you don't get a favourable judgment from the Supreme Court, that you will treat the general election as a vote on independence. Now, some people might say that's just a tad arrogant. Isn't it for the voters to decide what a general election is about?
Well, let's just remind ourselves what the voters actually decided. And we had an election last year where this was the #1 issue in the election. People voted, and they voted in record numbers for a pro-independence government in the Scottish Parliament. At the parties that were elected on a manifesto commitment that the people should be able to decide in the referendum won the election, and the parties that opposed that, the Conservatives, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats, lost. No, it's a very with greatest Trevor.
You weren't in the voting booth
with the greatest of respect.
How do you know that that was a #1 issue for them?
With the greatest, well, I was in the middle of the election campaign. I had the good fortune to win the seat that Ruth Davidson previously held as the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party in Edinburgh Central. I know very well why I won that election. I know what was in my manifesto, and the people knew what was in the SNP manifesto. I'm not going to patronise the electorate. The electorate voted for a pro-independence majority in the Parliament, and to simply do as if that doesn't matter, frankly, is not good enough in a democracy. And when you have guests on programmes and ask them whether they will respect democratic election results, to simply pass on from it when they say, no, we're not going to respect a democracy, is frankly slightly odd in my view. It is remarkable how UK political parties that lost the election in Scotland in this issue are given a pass on this. Either we live in a democracy or we don't. The people have voted to have the right to choose. And in a democracy, the people should be able to choose. They can vote yes, they can vote no, but surely they should have the right to choose. We can solve this issue very simply because we managed to do it in the run-up to 2014. The UK government respected the election result in Scotland. They passed what was called a Section 30 order, and we were able to hold a referendum in Scotland. There is no impediment to this happening. The fact that we've had to go to the Supreme Court, the fact that we're having to invoke the possibility of using elections to yet again show that people want to choose on this country's future is not where we need to be. I'd far rather the UK government just respected the Scottish electorate, respected the election result in the majority of the Scottish Parliament, and as good Democrats, abide by democratic standards. Unfortunately, the Conservatives, and now sadly also the Labour Party, are perfectly happy to discard Scottish democracy, and it's not good enough.
OK. Angus Robertson, thank you so much for joining us this morning.